Hello, and welcome to the webinar. Today, we are going to be talking about streamlining the risk and control self-assessment process. The webinar topic, risk and control self-assessments, is all about how the process operates and how to make it better. I'm going to introduce you to our demonstration expert, Jessica Bellata. Jessica is a senior solutions consultant with Protecht and will be taking you through the demo today. Here's our agenda for today's webinar. We should cover everything in about 20 minutes. This introductory portion will only take 2 or 3 minutes. We're going to talk a little bit about Protecht and who we are. We'll discuss what a risk and control self-assessment is and why it's important. And we'll look at some critical success factors in performing risk and control self-assessments. Finally, we'll go into Protecht ERM for a demonstration of our risk and control self-assessment solution. Before we get started, please feel free to post any questions, comments in the chat, and we'll respond to you directly following the demonstration. The slides will be made available following the webinar. For those of you who are new to our webinars and unfamiliar with Protecht Group, we are an enterprise risk management software and advisory company that supports our customers in all aspects of risk management: software, training, education, frameworks, advisory services, e-learning through Protecht Academy, and of course, our award-winning software suite, Protecht ERM. Today, we're going to focus on risk control self-assessments and how we can help streamline the process of performing risk and control self-assessments across your organization. So, when we think about streamlining the RCSA process, it's important to set the foundation of what the process is, why does it matter, and why does it matter now to you and your organization. RCSAs provide a structured mechanism for identifying operational exposures and the effectiveness of the controls. Those are the controls you put in place to manage risk. Through the RCSA process, weaknesses or gaps in controls can be identified, which can drive the organization to improving its risk posture. Now, why do people use the RCSA? They use it to identify and assess risks to determine if those controls are actually working. Are they really reducing and mitigating risk in the organization? It's called a self-assessment because it's typically performed by the risk owner, not by the second line of defense, but the first line of defense risk owner, because they should really understand the risk and its associated controls well enough to be able to assess its effectiveness. It's also conducted periodically. You may do them quarterly, semi-annually, or annually, depending on the severity of the risk. As to why now, it's really important to do RCSAs because they're one of the best tools to assess impending risk. You can use them to identify emerging risks. Many companies use them during digital transformation projects to identify new risks, and regulators require financial institutions to conduct them as part of their compliance obligations. It's a kind of a key to a successful risk program, and the key to a successful RCSA is an easy and efficient process. Protecht ERM supports the entire life cycle of risk, from the identification and assessment of risks, monitoring and review, and responding and recovering, as well as treating risks and improving the overall risk program. We call this the life cycle of risk. Risk occurs or it doesn't occur, but if you treat them the same way through assessing, monitoring, responding, and improving, you can manage your organization's response and participate in that life cycle of risk with confidence that you're protecting your organization. This can be performed for any type of risk that the organization faces. There are a number of critical success factors in performing risk and control self-assessments. We've identified 3 here. First, you should have a well-established and defined risk and control library set. This is your shared definition of risks and the controls used to mitigate those risks. Second, you should have a form of risk scales and metrics. These scales express qualitative and quantitative metrics for the risk appetite and the thresholds you're willing to accept before escalating risk treatment. They also define the metrics to measure risk and determine inherent and residual risk. This is found typically through key risk indicators. And then last, another critical success factor is reporting and issues management. It's valuable to have a consistent and reliable method to report risk posture control effectiveness, and be able to track issues that the organization has identified with risk and be able to mitigate those risks in the long term. Now, how do you really streamline the process? Well, there's some 4 simple steps that go into this process. First, you have to have a scope. What is it that you're assessing? Second, you need to know what the risks are that you're assessing. You might assess a single risk, or you may group them together based on their categorization. Third, what controls are being assessed? Similar to risks, you may group them together. You might assess one control at a time. You may assess multiple controls. And then lastly, what is the likelihood and impact scales that you're using to define how the risks are being measured? These actions will help you streamline the process. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Bellotta, and she's going to jump in and demonstrate Protecht ERM and a brief overview of how the risk control self-assessment process can be automated and simplified. Jessica.
Thank you, Terry. As Terry mentioned, I'm going to take you through the demonstration today on RCSA and how we handle that in Protecht ERM. So when I log in, I'm presented with the Corporate Office Risk Framework dashboard. And this dashboard gives me insight into my overall risk program. I am a second line manager, so that means I have access to pretty much everything, and I can see what all the departments across my organization are doing. In the upper left here, you see our health score, our corporate office health score, which is basically the overall score for the risk program. The number here is going to be driven by the information that you see in the tiles to the right. And these tiles are based on that life cycle of risk, which Terry talked about earlier. So we begin with identifying our risks and controls. Then we continue to monitor the risks and controls through things like attestations and KRIs. Then we initiate or assign any actions that need to be taken based on sort of the numbers that we come up with in risks and controls. And then finally, we can do audits and also identify and repair any potential incidents that should occur. The life cycle of risk is driven by the information that we see in the table below. And we call this information risk in motion. So risk in motion is a concept that's based on the idea that risk is always happening, and we need to keep on top of the risks as they change so that we can take proper steps to remediate or mitigate as it may be. So all of the information that you see in the table is live. It's going to be updated as things change. So if I want to look at one of my particular business units, and for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to be in the information technology department, I can see the overall risk score for just that department, their inherent and residual ratings. And I can also see the activity that's occurring in the IT department. And it's all in live. It's all up to date and live. So if I look here, I can see we have some non-compliant attestations that would be in red. I can also see we have some red KRIs. We have some overdue actions, and we have an incident which incurred some sort of fee. So if I want to get more information into what's going on in the IT department, I'm going to take a look at one of their risk assessments, for example. So I'm going to pop up to the top here, and I'm going to go into risk management review. I'll double click into risk management. And now I can see that I'm looking at all of the risk assessments that are currently being handled in the information technology department. So as we mentioned earlier, cyber attacks are something that every organization is potentially subject to. So we're going to focus on that for purposes of the demo. But before I jump in there, I just want to quickly point out the core libraries. Terry did mention these briefly when we were in the slide presentation, but I just wanted to give you an idea of kind of what it looks like in Protecht. So as mentioned, core libraries are really the central part of the system. They allow us to consistently capture all of the unified taxonomies that we use across the organization. So for things like risks in this case, but we also do controls, tags, causes, business units. So all of these different libraries hold that individual information, and all of the terminology, all of the taxonomies are the same, they're consistent. So we don't have individuals using different words for different risks. which would end up really making it difficult to report accurately. So the core libraries is really an essential part of successful risk assessment. And we also make it very easy at Protecht. We can interface with your systems that you may already have an existing core library in. We can bring those in. We can also bring in, if you've got your risk control libraries in spreadsheets, we can easily bring those in the system as well. Or if you don't have something like this, we can help you build it at implementation. So just pointing that out, where the core libraries live. So, excuse me, I'm going to pop back here into that RCSA. Okay, so now we're going to look again at our risk management list for information technology and specifically external cyber attacks. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that risk assessment, and then you'll see how we break down our risk and control self-assessment form. And this form aligns directly with ISO 3100, where we can handle identification, analysis, evaluation, and continual monitoring of risks. So if I go ahead and open up the details section, you'll see that there are basic information. We've got the risk we're dealing with, who owns the risk, as well as a description of the risk. We can also identify the causes. So again, these items here would be pulled from a core library. You just have to click on the three dots. You will open up the library of causes, and then anyone on your team or in your department can easily choose from that library which causes are connected to this particular risk. Next, you're able to determine what areas are going to be potentially impacted by this risk. So if this risk should occur, my impacted departments or areas are going to be things like our customers, reputation, financial, compliance, strategic objectives. I can tick off as many of these as I want. All of this information is also configurable. So if you have your impacts organized in a different way, or your departments or areas are have different names, that's completely configurable in Protecht. In fact, all of our fields are configurable. So anything you see here that may be a little bit different than what you're used to, or would rather see it in a different way, just keep in mind that that's something that we are able to easily accommodate. So once we've done all of our basic identification of the risk, we're then going to go ahead into coming up with our inherent rating. Now we're going to talk about the inherent rating. So this is the initial rating before we implement any controls. So in looking at our 5x5, which is what we're using to determine what the inherent risk rating is, you can use any type of scales or maps or heat maps that you use. We accommodate 3x3, whatever it might be. We have the ability to accommodate other types, but we use 5x5 in our example for this demo. So we can see here that the inherent rating is high, and then it gives the information on consequence, likelihood, and the rating. If I want to get information, further insight on how to rate this, I can go ahead up into our guidance tab, and we can provide users with a risk matrix consequence scale. This would, of course, be set by you, and you could determine what the thresholds are before we move into insignificant, minor, moderate, and so on. So that guidance is available as well. So we have a high rating here, which means we're going to want to implement some controls to bring that rating down a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the control section. And here you can see we have 3 controls that we've implemented. And you're also able to see information such as who owns the control, how often it's reviewed, when the next review date is, and most importantly, the design and operational rating of that control. So since we have quite a few partially effective, I'm going to go ahead into antivirus and take a closer look into that. So when I pop in here, I can see the details about this control. So again, the name, basic info, who owns it. Having the owner identified is very useful, since me as a manager will be looking to see who is responsible for this control, who's doing the testing on it. I want to know who's doing that, and I can then reach out to that person if necessary. So the ability to capture the owner and perhaps even an additional reviewer. So maybe it doesn't have to come to the head of risk, but it will go to somebody in a different level who would also be able to provide insight and review on a specific control test. So if I move down a little bit further, I can see the last time this was reviewed, when it's due to be reviewed again. And then here's where we see our ratings. So you can see we have a design rating as well as an operational rating. If I click on the drop down, you can see the different thresholds. These are, of course, configurable both in terminology and color coding. However you want to capture those ratings, we can do that. And then based on the fact that this is partially effective on the operational side, I'm going to want to assign action plans to certain individuals in order to improve that rating. So I can go ahead and assign an action, which will, choose the title. Again, you can pull this from a library. If I were to click add, it will open up a library and I can pull different actions that are already existing in the system. And I can see when it's due, what the level of completion is, and who owns that particular action. So again, giving us the ability to improve ratings by assigning plans to individuals so that we can have better outcomes for our controls. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of that. And then we're going to move down a little bit further. Based on the assignment of controls, do we want to perform further control testing? And now we've decided, yes, we do want to do that, again, because we have quite a few partially effective operational ratings. So here's where I would go ahead and do that control testing. So again, we'll pop into antivirus software and excuse me, and then we'll go ahead into the control testing details, what our objective is for this test, how often we perform the test. And then here I can go ahead and enumerate my test plan. What am I going to do? What steps am I going to take in this plan to ensure that the control is tested properly? I can then, once I perform the test, I can go ahead and put in my comments based on the outcome. I can see how many samples there are, as well as how many passed. So you can see I'm a little bit over average here. So 12 out of 20. So the control is considered effective since it is 12 out of the 20. However, it's not terribly effective. So it's a little on the low side. So we might want to continue to monitor this particular control result. And you can see if we drop down, we have, if this were, say, 19 or 20, we would obviously not need to take further action. If it was 9 or 8, we would want to take further action. But since it's sort of just above where it needs to be, we'll just continue to monitor it. We also give you the ability to attach documentation in the system. So if I want to put in any testing outcomes, antivirus policies, whatever it might be, you have the ability to drag and drop documents into Protecht, and we can accommodate any types, Word, PDF, etc. So very easy to kind of access documents from the system itself. And then finally, just a reviewer and the date that it was reviewed. Okay, so moving on, we're now going to go down to our residual rating. We've now put our controls in place, and we're going to see how those controls have mitigated our initial risk. So when I look at our new 5x5, I can see that our risk has come down. It's no longer high, but it's in the moderate stage. So still likely, which means that even though it's better, it's not great. So we have to decide whether we want to accept this residual rating or we want to treat it. Again, because we're not really where we want to be, we're going to want to treat this, this number, this residual rating. So once again, I'm going to assign action plans to individuals so that they can go ahead and take action, which will hopefully drive up the residual rating and put us from a moderate to hopefully a low. So again, the ability to assign things to folks in order to keep on top of the outcomes of these ratings. And then finally, if we scroll down to the bottom, we can see just kind of basic review information, who owns it, when the last review date is, and when the next review date is. So, and again, in terms of workflow for the system, any individual that you see listed in any of these forms is going to be notified via email that they have a task assigned to them, whether it's an action, whether they need to do a control test, whatever it might be. The workflow is such that they will be notified at whatever frequency or in any way you'd like them to be notified. So if it's a digest of once a week or, immediately, all of that is very configurable in the system. So finally, since we performed our risk assessment, that's basically how the risk and control self-assessment is done in Protecht. I wanted to quickly pop out to our home screen again because I wanted to take a look at a dashboard with you. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this dashboard, and this is going to give us some very high-level information about what's going on overall in our risk program. So I can see on the left I have a risk heat map. This is for residual risk. It's again that 5x5 likelihood and consequence. I can then see my top 10 residual risks in the program, so I'm able to identify which ones are kind of at the top. I can also see them broken down by rating. So you can see there's a color map there. We can see which one's percentage is high as opposed to moderate or low. I can break down see my risks by category. I can also see risks and controls. And then finally, I can see risk and assessments and actions that are due within the next 30 days. So as a manager, if I come in here and look at this dashboard, I'm going to know who is going to be performing either a risk assessment in RCSA or perhaps taking some action on a control or whatever it might be within the next 30-day period. So I know who I need to be paying attention to and what I should be expecting those actions or assessments to be coming in. Also, in all of our dashboards in Protecht, you have the ability to filter. So if I go ahead and click high, for example, I'm going to be able to see all of my risks that have a high rating. So in this case, I see the top 5 that have the highest ratings. I can see which ones by category are high, and for controls and the risk assessments that are due as well. So a lot of ability to slice and dice the data in a dashboard for Protecht. You also have the ability to configure dashboards. So if there are data points or graphical representations that you don't see here that you'd like to capture, or you maybe want to change a graph or whatever it might be, we have the ability to build those dashboards for you and make sure that we're getting the data that you want to see. And then finally, if I scroll down just a little bit, I can see the list view. So all of the data that's pictured here, or listed here rather, is what's driving the information in the dashboard. And I said finally, but there's one more point I want to make. There is the ability to export. So if I click on export, I have the ability to change this to PowerPoint, and then I can create a PowerPoint of this dashboard, and that will allow me to share the dashboard with other folks in the organization. I could share it with the board. I can share it with colleagues. So it's a very easy way to quickly build a dashboard-based report that would ordinarily, if you're using a spreadsheet or some other format, would probably take you quite a while to do. So very, very helpful in terms of being able to, on the fly, create reports and dashboards. So that is what I wanted to show you today. That concludes our webinar. Thank you for your time and attention on behalf of me, Terry Lee, and Protecht overall. If you'd like more information on RCSA, please visit our website and search RCSA in the search box. You'll find things like templates, frameworks, and also an in-depth Protecht Academy course that we'd hope you'd want to take advantage of. So thanks very much again, and have a great day.